again in Project Censored. There's no coverage in America, no coverage at all of what the military drone program is doing in foreign countries. The drone program, killing innocent people here and there at wedding parties, is not for defending American freedom. It's for creating pockets of people that hate America so that we'll have places where we can say, oh, well, there's Al-Qaeda terrorist cell over there. We got to keep the $1 trillion defense budget going. You know, we're creating small pockets of places around the world that hate Americans because we're slaughtering their women and children, and that takes the place of the old Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was our big ally. I mean, they were our ally in the Cold War, in other words. They were the other half of the great myth that you have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on nuclear weapons and everything else. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they had to create something new. So basically, the idea that we have unlimited terrorists around the world in these spots where there's people waiting to kill Americans, that's another myth. It's a total myth. If there were a whole bunch of people that wanted to kill Americans, you could very easily do it. The blue flyer I have in there is from the top 10 subjects that were blacked out as of 1997. And one of those top 10 was the fact that our government has a nuclear emergency search team that searches for nuclear terrorist bombs planted in American cities. And the hunt has been going on since November 4th, 1975, on Union Oil property in Los Angeles. And on that day, they decided, the government of America decided, don't tell the American public about the hunt for weapons, nuclear bombs, terrorist bombs. Don't tell them about the hunt until the day we don't find one and we lose a chunk of a city. When some third city joins Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the history books, then we got to admit there's a problem with ComEd's nuclear power plants, because that's where the terrorist bomb material comes from worldwide. The nuclear power industry is created, a lot of the mining materials, processing metals, all kinds of things. Nuclear power and nuclear weapons go together like hand and glove. You can't really have one without the other. So in 1985, one scientist published an article. Take a 10-second break here. One of my favorite comments out of one of the books was one nuclear scientist said, you know, the 12,000-pound bulk of a blast of a bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, that blast power has been condensed down to something the size of a football. You can carry it around in a purse. In fact, some of the nuclear designers refer to these things as Nagasaki footballs. And they said 12 properly outfitted motorcycles with a backpack and a rider, 12 properly outfitted motorcycles. 6 of them detonated near nuclear power plants, like 6 Fukushimas or 6 Chernobyls on American soil, and 6 of them in major cities, New York, Chicago, LA, all simultaneously gone at the same time. It's called a 12-bomb war. They've known this since the 80s, 30 years ago. It's been 30 years. A dozen decent bombs carried in knapsacks. Knapsacks can eliminate any country as a place for human habitation. 12 properly outfitted motorcycles. As one scientist said, well, Kawasaki lets the good times roll. I mean, this is like something right out of Dr. Strangelove, right? We can't have a motorcycle gap. We've got to keep moving forward. And Ted Taylor, great bomb designer from the 50s. Theodore Taylor was sitting around one day. They were in the office, top secret place, and they're debating how to make a thermonuclear weapon the size of a cantaloupe. And he had a light bulb moment that day. He said, if we can make thermonuclear weapons the size of a cantaloupe that you can carry around in a purse, if crazy people got a hold of these things, that would be the end of the human race. And he was right. And so he and a bunch of other scientists, John Goffman published Poison Power, Ernest Sternglass published the low-level radiation out of what happened at 3 Mile Island. They keep telling us that there were no casualties from 3 Mile Island, but there was like 1,000 deaths or more. Almost 1 million people died downwind of Chernobyl. God knows how many thousands of people have died downwind from Fukushima in Japan. But anyway, all of that, if we puncture the myth that we're dependent on foreign oil, you move to number 10 on this list. There is a global rooftop revolution started in Germany. Really, Germany is pushing it, but other countries are catching up fast. This book describes, it's by Danny Kennedy, it's called The Rooftop Revolution. This is one of the best. Actually, it's big print. It looks like it was written for people that can't find their glasses half the time. You can read this book without your glasses. It's big print. It's called The Rooftop Revolution. It describes how fast mass-produced solar panels, like this one I showed you, are spreading into the human population worldwide. They predict that, ComEd predicts that by 2015, next year, an internal report from our own ComEd says that 2/3 of the American population will make sense. It'll make sense for them to begin to go solar because they will get cheaper electricity off the roof than what the utilities can generate it for. ComEd is positioning themselves to run the internet highway, the long lines, to transfer energy from the wind farms, solar farms. They're not going to be in the nuclear energy business for very much longer. They're already shutting down a couple of nukes because they cannot compete economically with the big wind farms that are going up around here. If you drive 100 miles in any direction from here, you would be hard put not to go by a wind farm of some kind, because they're putting wind machines up in a lot of different areas now, because the new big wind machines the blades move slow. It takes 5 seconds to make one revolution. You can count. It's about 4.5 to 5 seconds. They turn slow. The wind just pushes them, and they generate electricity, usable electricity in slow breezes. You don't have to put wind machines up in mountain passes or out in the ocean where there's 30-mile-an-hour winds all the time. So, but solar energy, the cost in Chicago, you can order a solar system that will pay back in about 3 to 4 years versus savings on your electric bills. Doesn't take 20 years for a solar system to pay for itself. At current prices, rooftop solar is vastly cheaper than any kind of fossil fuel from the utilities. The public just doesn't know it yet, because what he refers to, this man, Danny Kennedy and Harvey Wasserman, both refer to the coal and oil companies. Collectively, the multi-trillion-dollar fossil fuel industry is what they call King Kong. K-O-N-G. Coal, oil, nukes, and gas. Well, King Kong is in the third stage of what Gandhi called the 4 stages. He said when an idea is time, the idea has come. It's an idea whose time has come. First, they ignore you. Then they ridicule you. Then they fight you. Then you win. It's like what happened with, we got ignored, then we got ridiculed, then we got into fistfights asking people to put out their cigarettes, and then we win. Today, you don't even have to ask somebody to put out a cigarette. If somebody is stupid enough to light up in a restaurant, you just call the police. It's against the law. You don't have to approach somebody and risk them pulling out a handgun because of the new carry laws. I mean, look, we're living in strange times. What Phil called a Disneyland of militant ignorance. I like that comment. And there's just so many good things happening. The single most hopeful site I know of on the internet, where they have, it's printer friendly, you can download a page or two, 2-page summary of the database, or a 10-page summary. It's called Want to Know Info. And it's www.wanttoknowinfo. And it's on the back of these cards. These are what's called portal websites. Each one of these websites is like a portal or a doorway into the other world where all the blacked out news is. A portal website. You log on to Patriots Question 9/11 for a half an hour and your life is never going to be the same if you still think we were attacked by 19 crazed Muslims that got lucky on the morning of 9/11. Well, I mean, it's a beautifully sold myth. The media had the script that day. If the media wasn't promoting the myth and blacking out the reality, then we would have seen film of the firefighters back at the station that night saying, yeah, we watched the layers of explosives going off. We know we watched the controlled demolition of those buildings. Everybody knew it. And the rest of the world knew this. You get outside the United States, published all over the world since September 12th. But here, we have, are any of you familiar with the concept of a group of people called ditto heads? Those are the people that listen to Rush Limbaugh. And they rise up every 4 years, they rise up off the couch, they head to the polls, it looks like the night of the living dead. People, and they vote for criminals masquerading as Republicans. And one author said that the old, mainly old angry white men that are voting for these criminals, they're dying off now, they're fading away, and that's the major voting bloc of the Republican criminals. They're in the minority, so the minority is being changed and displaced by an increasing number of minorities and Latinos. They said the Republican scientists have a real problem. They have not been able to figure out how to make Latino women give birth to old white men. So, since their scientists couldn't do that, they're gerrymandering districts as fast as they can, and to keep Democrats, majorities, heavy majorities, away from the polls. There's massive voter suppression going on right now. They're just scurrying around like a bunch of cockroaches in the dark to get ready for the 2014 and 2016 elections, to try to steal the elections back from progressive and just common sense people that are sick and tired of what's happening in America. So if you want to know beneficial news, log on to Want to Know Info. There's 12 different disciplines on that site. For those of you that have never seen this book, it's called Into the Buzzsaw. It's written by Christina Borgeson. Forward is by Gore Vidal, and this was published in its expanded edition now. Came out in 2004. She collected the stories of 18 Pulitzer Prize winners, plus herself, that got fired and blackballed one day as journalists for trying to report something that would matter to Americans. And this is one, she wasn't aware. She was a longtime producer for ABC, and she never ran up against what she calls the corporate buzzsaw, because she never really worked on a radioactive story until she was assigned to work on the crash of Flight 800 for TWA that went down off the East Coast in 1996 or something like that. Well, there was all kinds of hundreds of eyewitnesses that reported seeing a missile go off a Navy ship and fly toward that plane. And so the Navy just beat feet out of the area. They all left as soon as that plane went down. They were conducting exercises, and it was an accident. A drone missile was fired into the air. They didn't know that missile was heading toward an airliner rather than an empty Navy drone that they were practicing with. So it was an accident, but they didn't want to admit that our military accidentally shot down a commercial airliner with a couple hundred people in it, something like that. So immediately a cover-up got started, and she working for ABC, she started, investigating, and she talked to some people that, had insider knowledge. And the long and the short of it was, ultimately, that ended her career at ABC, as she was fired for it. And so she collected the stories of a bunch of other people that have gotten fired and blackballed. And Project Censored, incidentally, Project Censored and these other journalism schools, they teach journalism students from day one how not to get fired and blackballed in America if you're going to be a journalist. Because you can't investigate certain things or you just get fired. Now in Mexico, if you try to report some things, they just go out and kill you. It's no big deal. In other countries, you just get killed. Here you get fired and blackballed. But there's more and more journalists. It's hazardous to be a journalist in many other countries now because the mainstream media are trying to keep the public from finding out that there's a global revolution of people demanding more and more human rights of all kinds. Are you okay? Oh, yeah. I thought somebody was raising their hand. I'm sorry about that. As I said before, without a sense of humor, I wouldn't even be here. I would have been dead 20 years ago. If I wasn't a coach for 7th graders for the last 20 years, doing something really encouraging and working with kids that want to learn, I mean, some of this depressing information might have gotten the best of me. But there's just so much, and after tonight, if anybody wants to go out and have coffee, sit around and talk for a few minutes, look at the literature, we've got some people that are coming later, let me know. You know, they kick us out of here at 9 o'clock, but we've got an hour and 15 minutes yet. We'll do questions and answers and rebuttal and see what happens. I guess that's pretty much the end of the presentation. We should start the questions and answers period.
Yes.
Hey, Bram, I can moderate from up here and answer questions if you want.
I'll do it.
Was this basically understandable so far?
Yes.
Okay.
Encore.
Encore. Well, thank you all for coming.
None of us came in late.
That's Yaris?
Yeah, Eris.
Eris.
Eris, like Aristotle.
Okay. You had what is your question?
You know, Andy, I tell you something. Every time I hear you, a few precious moments each time. I haven't heard you, let's say, for 10 hours straight, but I could be happy to hear you talking 10 hours straight. Because, man, I tell you, you deserve a national audience. You should be on on national television. But
Yes.
You have a question about anything you talked about tonight?
You know, I'm going to ask something, Andy. No, we all here were present when it happened. And I have brought this up at, when there was a famous woman journalist downtown at the Washington Library in the Loop. And I asked this question. She was a famous journalist. I forgot what her name was. But the thing is, in all those books, I doubt I've looked at one of those censored books. I bought one a couple of years ago. But I'm looking for the most censored story of our generation, which helped Barack Obama become president, which I think he might have lost to Hillary Clinton if this crime of 5 women that were murdered in Tinley Park at a clothing store in Tinley Park. Here was Super Tuesday coming up in the United States in the primary.
Time for a long story.
Okay, and here's my question.
What's your question?
Do you know that was suppressed for 4 or 5 days? They didn't even say who it was. About 5 days later, it was brought out once, maybe in a 5-second coverage. There was a black man who murdered 5 women, I think 3 white and 2 black, at the Tinley Park women's shop, and they covered that up and continue to cover it up because I think that would have destroyed Barack Obama becoming president and would have brought Hillary Clinton to the presidency. But, by the way, I have no support for either one of them, but I always vote Democratic.
Your question was, why was that covered up, or is it referred to in any of these books?
Are you aware that, when 5 people got killed in
No, I have never run across that story.
Okay,
that's how successful it is blacked out.
It's the most suppressed story of the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's one of them, yeah.
Andy, can the BBC be trusted?
Oh,
NPR
the question is, can the BBC be trusted or the NPR?
PBS.
If you want to know which media you can trust and what, how they're, the left-wing media, the supposedly left-wing media is full of what this man, Eric Larson, refers to these people like Amy Goodman, and everybody know who Amy Goodman is? And Bill Moyers and a bunch of other people that are on the Democratic left, supposedly, they are acting as gatekeepers on certain of these blacked out subjects. You notice that none of them ever talk about 9/11. None of them ever talk about the myth of the AIDS epidemic, which is common knowledge all over the world. They don't talk about, my own personal opinion is, in this, knowledge is spreading from the bottom up. People in the media, like Amy Goodman, she can't talk about certain things because she could have a car accident or something. That's what happens if you get too close, or if you're, Charlie Sheen was taken off the air, off of the most popular subject on, one of the most popular on television. Charlie Sheen was removed because he was talking about 9/11. Same thing with Rosie O'Donnell. She was she supported the firefighters in New York and wanted to interview them and talk about them, and they just chucked her right off the air. And Phil Donahue was taken off the air in the lead up to the first invasion in 2003, the invasion of Iraq, the Iraq War. Major media figures that we could trust are just pulled off the air by the billionaire owners. That's why I talk about in Galileo's time, had no phone, no electricity, no television, and very few books, no internet. The only way you could learn something was to walk over and talk to somebody. Knowledge spread from person to person. And on the blacked out subjects that we're talking about here, knowledge spreads from me to you to your friend. Having a conversation, telling somebody, log on to this website, read it for yourself. The only way you'll hear about some of these websites is through somebody telling you about it, visibly, telling you about just, verbal knowledge, communication, person to person. Another question?
Yeah.
Yes, Mike Foley.
Every once in a while I hear somebody talking about these windmills, and a complaint is that somehow birds keep flying into them and getting killed. But nobody ever explains anything about that. Have you ever heard about that? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, his question was, every now and then we hear about birds being killed by windmills, and it's one of the things, windmills do kill a few birds, but the number of birds killed by windmills is a fraction of the number of birds that are killed by pollution and everything else from coal and fossil fuel power stations, and the water, the heated water downwind in the lakes and rivers from nuclear power plants. Though the fossil, King Kong is much more detrimental to all wildlife and birds and fish than the windmills. But that particular excuse is used to try to slow down the spread of an alternative form of energy that's an idea whose time has come. And so,
Carl Schwett, and then Wes Wagner.
The Red Cross also doesn't allow us to do the flu shot. But my question is, the Snowden guy, Edward, is he, do you consider him a patriot or is he a traitor?
the question is Edward Snowden a patriot or a traitor? I think if you get outside the United States media and listen to objectively what other people are saying, he's overwhelmingly 98% considered a patriot. And he blew the whistle on what our government is doing, what the military is doing, large crimes against humanity. Back in Eisenhower's time, these kinds of whistleblowers in the military, following, if they took an oath to defend the Constitution, they were honored for their service, for exposing a crime rather than prosecuted for exposing the crime. There's, in my mind and in millions of others, there's no question that Edward Snowden is a patriot. No question that he's being vilified by the right-wing media to slow down the spread of the knowledge of what he actually did and how he risked it. And the young man named Bradley Manning, who is in jail now for 35 years for exposing a crime of our soldiers just using civilians and journalists for target practice, like Lieutenant Calley at My Lai. Incidentally, for those of you that are interested in the types of things that these journalists are trying to expose, this book was written a couple of years ago by Nick Pearce. It's called Kill Anything That Moves. Kill Anything That Moves, and it describes what Lieutenant Calley did was not an aberration. Like we were said, well, that guy just went crazy one day and killed a bunch of Vietnamese, but most of our troops are doing honorable things. No, Lieutenant Calley, he was acting under orders, and his orders were basically the rule of the day in Vietnam. There were many, many other companies that were just slaughtering civilians all over the place, the same way Cali did at My Lai. And this book describes that. Does that answer your question, or is that enough?
Okay, Wes Wagner?
What is the current president's perspective on these issues you put forward?
What is the current president's perspective on these issues?
Yeah.
My own opinion, I'm not sure that there's a big enough database yet historically. We're living in real time. It's hard to tell what happened to Barack Obama after he got elected. But some surprising things happened. As far as I'm able to determine from studying the history of recent presidents, Barack Obama is the only one ever to keep the whole infrastructure of criminals from the previous administration. When a Democrat takes the White House, usually you give 2,000 pink slips to the Republican political appointees. Obama didn't do that. A few top people changed hands by the president, vice president, secretary of state. But all of the political appointees running the infrastructure of the government in the 8 years of the Bush-Cheney corporate criminal, runaway train, those people were left undisturbed running our government. And that's why the Republicans have have success in just attacking the president and thwarting virtually everything he wants to do, is because of this, corporate criminal combine that's in place. And also, I think we would be foolish to think that President Obama was not given the update on JFK's film. Like the comedian Bill Hicks said, they show him a film, they pull down the screen, and they show him a film from the grassy knoll with the 10 bullets flying through the car and say, "Any questions, Mr. President?" They make it plain that if you mess with this, you can be the next JFK or the next Paul Wellstone. Paul Wellstone was murdered 10 days before the election to change the tip balance of the Senate from 51-49 Democrat to 51-49 Republican. There's no question on that. There's a book on that called American Assassination. So Barack Obama is not really running the country at all. We still have a corporate criminal combine running this country, and the Democratic side is not, properly speaking up on this.
Who's
I
running
think
it?
what?
Who's running it? Cheney?
Cheney's friends. Yeah, a lot of the people that were friends of George and Dick, they're still in government. And George and Dick are out there on the speaking trail when they should be in prison for the rest of their lives for crimes, huge crimes against humanity. Is anybody here familiar with the book, The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder? That was written by Vincent Bugliosi. It came out in 2008, just before we voted them out. In other words, we thought we were voting an end to the corporate criminal combine. The first thing that Obama did when he got in was saying, "We're not going to prosecute anybody. We're going to look forward." And so the corporate criminal combine, in conjunction with our press, has a tight grip on the information on this kind of stuff that reaches the American public, what does and what doesn't. Who else has a question?
Travis?
David Travis, where's David?
You made a statement earlier that no Republican has legitimately been elected since Dwight Eisenhower. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was what he said.
Does that include Ronald Reagan?
Oh, yeah. It definitely includes the elect. The question was, has any Republican been honestly elected since Dwight Eisenhower? And the question is no. Nixon won by making private deals with the Chinese, planning to give them a better deal. He just basically lied. President Nixon was LBJ. LBJ is on record as talking to Everett Dirksen, saying that what Nixon and his people are doing is treason, and they ought not to be doing that. He said, but they covered it up. When LBJ lost his, who was it? Hubert Humphrey? that lost in '68 was running after LBJ. Humphrey, Nixon beat Humphrey, and Nixon beat Humphrey by engaging in treasonous activities to shift the voting percentages and everything to get in office. And then in Ronald Reagan in 1980, and Cheney and Rumsfeld were involved in massive treason with the Iranians in the arms for hostages deal, where the Iranians agreed to keep the hostages until right after Reagan got elected to make Jimmy Carter look bad. And then we had 12 years of the Bush crime family running the country from 1980 to 1992. Bill Clinton took over temporarily, and I keep telling people that Bill Clinton was one of the best Republican presidents we ever had. He was not a Democrat in any way, shape, or form, but he masqueraded as a Democrat. And then Bush, George Bush lost the election to Gore in 2000, and the Supreme Court stopped the vote with, there's a DVD that describes that. I brought some of these DVDs to show you. Anybody that hasn't seen it, the updated version of Michael Moore's movie called Fahrenheit 9/11. This is, I got this out of the library.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
It's an excellent DVD that talks about all the shenanigans that went on to install George Bush the first time after he clearly lost the election in 2000. And then in 2004, we voted those criminals out in a landslide. It was like 6-8 million votes nationwide, 10 million votes, something like that. Bush lost it in a landslide, and Las Vegas odds makers called it at about 8 o'clock at night. We all went to bed celebrating that we did our job and voted those criminals out. We didn't know they had Republican criminals in 11 states that had the ability to switch the vote totals in the electronic voting machines, which is what they did. They just switched the vote totals after we went to bed, came out at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they announced it was closed, but George was the winner. You know, the Bush-Cheney, I'll just say this. I've considered the Bush-Cheney administration as the most successful 8-year administration in the history of this country. They got more of what they got done running roughshod over the opposition party. The opposition party was just flat on the floor for like 8 solid years because they knew they were dealing with killers. They weren't dealing with politicians. And it was the greatest corporate criminal crime spree in the history of our country. So, yes, and there's a huge database on that.
All right, Russell Johnson.
Yeah, you say that the Republicans have been gerrymandering these districts is to take over?
Just look at Indiana.
Yes, but look at Illinois. You have Democrats doing the same thing.
Well, both sides have been somewhat gerrymandering, but nothing has ever been seen like the gerrymandering right now that's going on in Republican districts. As in many of these states, the overwhelming majority of voters is Democratic, but yet the majority of the seats, the congressional seats, are going to Republicans, like Pennsylvania and a few others. You can log on to several good sites, and you can just do a Google search on gerrymandering, you can read that for hours. But they're doing everything they can to maintain corporate criminal control of these governorships. And what's happening is that you get 10,000 minutes of cribs, criminally insane bullshit. You get 10,000 minutes of cribs for each minute of truth on some of these subjects on the major media. The major media is not covering what the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. That's considered one of the most disgraceful, unconstitutional decisions. The Supreme Court just disgraced itself when it voted on the Citizens United decision in 2010 that says billionaires can pour unlimited amounts of money into any political race in the country. They can, if they want to spend $100 million getting a governor elected in Virginia, they can do it. Up until 2010, there were laws. Basically, there were laws that were not enforced that much sometimes, but we had laws on the books that said you can't just buy and sell our politicians wholesale. But that all went out the window with the Citizens United decision. So that's why it's so important for us to ignore the ads on TV, making it look like this particular person is not really a Republican, is just a good old boy, common sense. Like George Bush was portrayed when he was running for office in 2000. Even Molly Ivins. Molly Ivins was a great progressive writer. She wrote an article, I still got it hanging on my wall, framed. She said, well, W got elected, but there's going to be enough cooler heads around him that he can't really do too much damage. Well, she was off by a country mile on that. And because nobody dreamed that the press would just, with Fox News, they would take over America for 8 solid years of criminal activity. We're just in virgin territory.
But as long as you make it sound like you're coming from just complaining about one party when both parties are doing it, you're just gonna make yourself look as a partisan. You have to attack when both parties are doing it equally.
Save that for the rebuttal.
All right.
Yeah, you're right. Both parties have been doing it.
You have been standing there for some time. I wonder if
In the
you
back?
have a question.
Actually, I do. I have a question. If you're not starting other myths about AIDS, I had a very, very good friend. I have many good friends who do not party and take all sorts of drugs. And my friend died. And I don't know if he died just from a fake disease, but I think you're starting to when you say that the ones who died of AIDS were just partying too much and taking too much drugs, that's starting a myth.
Would you like one?
I didn't mean to give you the impression that every person that died during that period didn't have AIDS or didn't have a rundown immune system. What I'm talking about specifically is they told a lot of sick people that they had AIDS when they had a rundown immune system. These people were misdiagnosed. Is anybody here old enough to remember the case of Ryan White, the boy from Indiana? There's a video or DVD you can Google. I don't have a copy of it, but it tells the history of his short life, and in the final stages, it says the thing you need to know about Ryan White is that he didn't have AIDS, and he didn't die of AIDS. That's specifically what they said. Ryan White didn't have AIDS, he didn't die of AIDS, he was murdered by an AIDS doctor that fed him the equivalent of rat poison 4 times a day and cheerleaded that boy right into his grave. The treatment was fatal. The virus was harmless. That's the Catholic Church moment that a lot of people are facing. They cannot believe that our government would allow a drug company to put a fatal chemotherapy drug, which is the equivalent of rat poison for humans, on the market and market it in like a treatment. So they estimate that over 95% people that died of AIDS died from the poison. Okay.
Next question is from Tim Baldwin.
Will you speculate about 10 years and basically tell us where you think the country is headed?
I'll give a quick answer to that. Speculate 10 years and tell us where the country is headed. Where is that book? There's a book here somewhere. There it is. These two, you want to know where the country is headed in 10 years, it's going to be one of two things. This book, 10 billion, spells it out. In the final state, he says 10 billion. There's 7 billion, a little over 7 billion people on the earth, right? He said in a short time, if we don't do anything with the population growing, there's going to be 10 billion of us. That's how fast the population's growing. He said with 10 billion, got all kinds of graphs and charts. More fresh water is needed, more food, more pollution, everything else. He said, we need to do some things. We urgently need to do, and I mean actually do, something radical to avert a global catastrophe. He says, but I don't think we will. I think we're fucked. That's what this author says. He said, we get a Manhattan Project started with solar, wind power. We actually get up and do something now, this year, next year, all of us. We get off fossil fuel, we directly confront the psychopathic owners of King Kong, the billionaires. Start calling these people out. You're not just a rich billionaire, you're a psychopathic bastard. And the language matters. These people are criminals. They're destroying the environment. If we don't do anything, in 10 years, we'll be past the tipping point and it'll be over. Where the human race is going to be, one author said we're well into the sixth great extinction. The last one was 65 million years ago. 10 years from now, if we get solar, wind power, we support that like we did the Manhattan Project. But, the public didn't know about that, but the public supported the moonshot. Everybody thought it was great, we landed on the moon. We can do something in 10 years,
David Shinseki.
okay? One or the other.
Isn't the system you're describing that exists today, corporatism, better known as fascism?
The system we have, yeah, all of the books talking about what our government's doing and corporatism, yeah, they're trying to convert America into a corporate fascist society as fast as they can. And we have been sitting back, letting it happen, as, Americans have been sitting back, not protesting, not facing the reality, not searching out the information that describes what's actually happening. And so, as these books, many of them point out, we're close to the tipping point.
The right guy to step in to the office to use the infrastructure.
Well, we have a lot of good people in this country, but they need our support. They need the support of millions of us at the bottom. Just like the Catholic Church got the message economically. A whole bunch of people said, you don't get any more of my money. I'm not even coming to church anymore until you do something about the priest problem. They just said it's unacceptable. And, they covered that up for years. But the Catholic Church made a move, and, they're addressing the issue because people started voting with their money and their feet. And that's what we have to do. We have to support companies that are doing good things. We have to help spread beneficial knowledge. Find out where the beneficial knowledge is and help people learn. Things get better when a bunch of people move in a positive direction. I believe that. So it's not too late.
Is that adequate response to your question?
Was there something else you wanted to know?
Well, there was a minor thing. Have you ever seen that TV series that came out around 2006 called Jericho?
Vaguely. I didn't watch it
I'll
much.
look it up on the internet. It's pretty interesting.
It's a series about
It's
government?
about a coup d'etat where the side that wants to take over uses nuclear weapons in suitcases.
Oh. Yeah, there's been all kinds of stories on how they take over a country by threatening to use suitcase
Well, that show
nukes.
got pulled after a season and a half, and in the last show, the main character says, it's not a country anymore, it's a corporation.
All right.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you, but it's not a question,
Oh.
so we'll go to Gene Anderson.
Gene?
Yeah, and it left me confused. Tim Boyer asked you about the future, and you mentioned
Two different
10
possibilities.
Right, you said 10 million people, and you went into the substitute for fossil fuel and so forth and so on. I didn't see the connection here. Were you saying that the 10 million people will be our downfall?
Yeah, what that author, what he said, if we let the human race get to 10 billion, the population keep growing, and we don't do anything to cut down the total fossil fuel worldwide, then we'll pass the tipping point and the human race is just going to go extinct in 30 or 40 years. 97% of us will die off if we don't do something now. The population is growing. We don't have 10 years to mess around with this. We've got to get something started now, 2014, 2015.
Yeah, well, my question then is, now that I understand a little different, my question is, how is the fossil fuel, getting rid of fossil fuel, saving the population from dying? I don't.
Well, getting rid of fossil fuels doesn't initially attack the overpopulation problem But Buckminster Fuller is back in 1984. He published a book called Critical Path, and he said, yeah, he's long dead. He said, they have graphs and charts and studies showing that as you spread electricity around the world and the standard of living goes up, population growth comes down. Providing a better standard of living with clean, non-fossil fuel, non-nuclear energy in third world countries will slow down the growth of the worldwide population. We can get a handle on it, stabilize it, if we go green as fast as possible for everybody in the world. Does that help?
Thank you. You answered it. Otherwise, confusion is gone for me. But I got a question.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the book that was written in the, I think, the late 50s, The Population Explosion? They were scaring people about, if we don't do something, the population, blah, blah, blah. So, are you familiar with that book?
Yeah, that was one of the earliest ones that I read about population growth, and there was the population bomb was written by Paul and Ann Ehrlich.
Yeah, well,
Paul Ehrlich, and they did scare a lot of people. What happened was they miscalculated how fast the use of fossil fuel and new green hybrids could produce more food, so you didn't hit the wall of starvation. They miscalculated by about 30 years. But now the scientists now have got a better handle on how fast topsoil is being destroyed and everything else. And then we've got satellite images of farmland all over the world, what's decaying. They didn't have all those numbers back in the late 60s when Ehrlich wrote the population bomb. They got a much better handle on it today, so they can say flat out that 10 billion, another 3 billion people is definitely going to be a planetary burden. We might make it. We might be able to handle 10 billion if they're not burning fossil fuels like we are today. Another 3 billion burning coal and oil and everything else. That's going to be it for the human race, for our kids. It's over.
David Zucker?
So in other words, what you're saying is that what Paul and Ann Ehrlich predicted, it wasn't that it wasn't true, it's just that they were off by a few years and that the bill is about to come due.
Yeah, the question was, were they correct? Well, they got a lot of flack for being, their dire predictions of the population bomb exploding and imminent starvation. It didn't happen because they didn't foresee the so-called green revolution, where you can grow more food with genetically modified crops or change crops and massive amounts of fossil fuel and fertilizer and everything else. Well, we've been growing food, but we've been burning massive amounts of fossil fuel and polluting the planet to produce that food. That's what he spells out in that book, 10 billion. Producing food for another 3 billion. The food production will be a tremendous drain on the planet. He's got it over there.
I have a couple of questions myself. One is that I've been giving blood for some time, and I also get flu shots, and nobody has ever told me not to get a flu shot.
So, do you get your flu shot before or after you donate blood? Or does it? Yes. Well, you're from a demographic group that is very low on the HIV/AIDS risk list. So if your test came up positive in 2 or 3 of the 8 bands on the list, they say, oh well, that's they also use a questionnaire, and if you're from a low risk group, then they tell you you're HIV negative. It's the higher risk groups of people that are younger, demographically minorities. Those are the ones that are more or less targeted, by the AIDS community, the pharmaceutical community. Does that answer? Do you have a different question?
That indicated that Hubert Horatio Humphrey was elected in 1968, and somehow Nixon stole the election. I didn't.
No, apparently.
Have that reaction at the time.
I think what happened was Hubert Humphrey. Nixon got more of the votes, You know, the people did vote Nixon in because Hubert Humphrey was made to look bad. Nixon was made to look good by the underhanded skullduggery that was going on. So you can't say that. Huh?
Wallace picked up a lot of those.
Yeah. Then there's. Yeah, I didn't mean to say that Hubert Humphrey lost it, and won, and they changed the votes. I mean, Nixon was doing dirty things that made him look better in the press coverage. And so it looked like Nixon was going to be better for the country than Humphrey, the way the president, people went to polls and voted Nixon in. That's how it went.
Mike Lee has a second question.
Yeah.
We gotta have to switch to rebuttals after your question, I think,
Okay.
though.
Oh, are we?
Two quickies. Who's in charge of the stories? The editors, the reporters, the 6-7 media. I mean, in American media, who's in charge of
Okay,
the story?
the question is, who's in charge of the stories that we see in the
Little bit
American
of
media?
each. Yeah.
Well,
What gets out there?
the owners of the media
The big
and the highly paid editors. You know, there's 5 owners, or basically 5 companies. It used to be 50. Now there's like 5 or 6 big ones, and their editors know what things to cover and what things not. And so, the editors, there's a whole filtering process coming down from the top. And a lot of, they talk about this in these books. Journalists learn from working at the place where they're at. They learn quite quickly what kinds of stories are acceptable to their owners and which ones aren't. They might pitch a story and they say, well, we covered that once 2 years ago, no, we don't want to cover it again. So, most journalists know that they have to go along, get along without ruffling any feathers.
So my last question before, can the BBC media be trusted? Is that about of the big medias?
Can the BBC, well, the BBC is better than American media on a lot of things.
Yeah.
But the BBC is also run in Great Britain. Great Britain is an ally of America in the American military-industrial complex.
But by and large, BBC is probably the best.
The BBC is
out
better
there
than most
of the
outlets
big-
in America,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay.
Okay?
That's what I thought.
All right, I think we have.
We got one last question here. One quick question here. What was yours?
Mine is, my question is,
Yeah, Rudy.
yes, Rudy. You said vote with your money, but in your opinion, what do you think it'll take to cause a landslide on a lot of these issues? What do people day to day do?
The question, what can people do day to day? What's it going to take? Well, in that book, 10 billion, he spells it out. He says people have to, we need a change, people have to work toward positive change every day. We need a 10-year concentrated, like moonshot program with I refer to us as the greatest generation. Not the World War II people that won World War II, but we will be looked on, you, me, anybody else that is working toward positive change and trying to wake other Americans up and get them moving with us, will be viewed as the greatest generation that brought the human race back from the edge of extinction in this 10-year time frame. That's what we've got. We'll know, if we make it another 10 years, we will know wholeheartedly whether the human race, most of it's going to survive the next 40 or 50 years. We will have the answer in just a few years, because if the ice of the North Pole and the methane in the tundra keeps melting at the present rate, then in 10 years it'll be over. We'll be past the tipping point, planet's going to warm up 12 degrees, Manhattan will be underwater in 20 years, along with a lot of other coastal cities, and just massive climate change where, as he said, 97% of the human race is going to be facing unlivable conditions, totally, within 20 years. And they're talking about that's how fast it's happening, and that's why Project Censored has said over and over again that climate change, how fast it's happening, is the #1 critical issue of our time. If we don't address that, then none of these other things matter. But we have to address these others as issues of human decency. We can't just abandon all these other issues also in our quest to make, You know, they're interactive. You know, they're linked together. Once you get people working toward positive change, beneficial things happen on several different fronts. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for
Okay.
the question.
We're gonna have to go to rebuttals.
Yeah. Well,
Let's go to rebuttals, Brom.
our speaker who has raised and been standing here for a long time. I want to know how many people have rebuttals to make tonight, who are going to enlighten the rest of us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Brought my stand. Did you want it or did okay. Should I bring it in
Only
here?
6?
There's 7.
7. At least 7.
You remember where the phrase came from?
And how much time do we have left?
We got about 30 minutes. Go about 4 minutes apiece. I'll time it strict. I think we could probably get it within about 4 minutes.
Our speaker will have a summary. Too.
And I'm sure we can go a little after 9 if we need to.
Okay. All right.
Right, hang on, let me get-
Beginning with Gene Horker and then Mike Foley. We will proceed. Okay. I think we should shift some of these books.
We're good, Brom. Just leave them. We'll start the rebuttals.
All right.
Okay, can we get the guy out of the way so we can see the speakers, please?
Okay, thanks, Andy. That was a very interesting presentation. Some people say that to question is the answer. Of course, here at the College of Complexes, we do a lot of that. And you can see the advantage of this system because I heard Brom and Gene Autry Anderson ask Andy some very pointed questions so we can get closer to the truth when you can get closer to the person. Unfortunately, we can't get very close to the President of the United States, so we can't ask him very hard questions. That's a real problem. But thanks a lot, Andy, for your presentation. Experts for sale. I think that's pretty much, almost everybody agrees to that it seems like in the United States, maybe in the whole world, money is way more important than truth. And people who are experts, PhDs and lawyers and CPAs and all, other kind of experts, I don't want to pick them out only, but a lot of them will sell out for $1. And that's something we have to live with. But again, when you talk to them face to face, you're a little more likely to get at the truth. The idea of 22 veterans a day committing suicide, at least I read that recently in the Christian Science Monitor. I don't know if anybody else picked up that, but that's right in our normal media. So that's, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Fracking, hey, at my church, that's all we're talking about. Not all we're talking about. We're talking frequently about fracking. I've seen videos on it, I've heard talks, I've seen articles. So all this stuff is well known to at least me. I assume others are the same way. Private water, again, this is nothing new. I think a couple years ago they had this problem in Bolivia. Finally the people said, to hell with this, we're not going to do this. And they sold the private water back to the public. Student loans, this is another disaster. I don't know how this happened, but now this is over 50 years' time. I got a master's degree about 50 years ago. I didn't know a damn penny when I got done. We got a young lady in my church. She told me a couple weeks ago she owes $110,000. So this is some kind of sick scam that people are using. I see no reason for this.
Do you need change? Yeah.
Okay, I can't pick up the rest of it. Thank you. All right, Jane.
Bill Webb.
Thank you, Jane.
I've been hearing Andy speak for several years now. And it's pretty much the same speech every time. There isn't anything I really disagree with, other than his methodology. There really isn't any theory that connects all this stuff together. And I've shared a lot of experiences similar to what he has, except it's been more personal for me. About 30 years ago, I found out where a former mayor of Chicago was going to collect about $10,000 in legal fees for returning tax monies. He had a very major hand in collecting. I went all over the city trying to get an expose of this, and all people would tell me is, well, that's Chicago. He wound up collecting these legal fees. I haven't heard of anybody else doing this. He got through that trolley with just giving back the tax monies. And I count that as sort of a sotto voce victory, which I suppose is. But anyway, I think there's only so much you can do playing small ball like this. You need something that generalizes things a bit. And what I see is free market theory. I mean, you can flagellate it, capitalist abuses all you want as far as I'm concerned. But I see that as being largely the products of a central bank and an income tax. Until you get rid of those things, you're going to have these problems continuing pretty much as before. Well, I guess I can, what I'd like to do is, I put together an email to Charles Koch that I'm sending out to different people. And anybody wants to give me an email, I don't know when I'm going to get this all together. I haven't had very much computer access lately. But I'll send it to you, and it's a pretty decent introduction to free market theory and the distinction between a genuinely free market and a quote-unquote free market. But you need some kind of theory to slice the Gordian knot, or you're going to be unraveling it forever.
Mike Foley.
I'm Michael Foley. I always like listening to Andy's lectures. Generally, I disagree once in a while with what Andy says. I disagree with him about some of the things he says about AIDS. But I generally agree with Andy, and I do agree with the idea that the media really is just another part of the empire that's screwing us. I want to say something about Andy's books. I bought 2 books from Andy, and I'm really glad I did. They're thorough. Shut up. See. What does it matter? I bought 2 books from you, and I'm glad I bought the books from you, all right? The books are thorough, they're informative, they're detailed, they're deep. And I found them to be very worthwhile to be reading them. And I would recommend that if Andy's talking about a book and it's on a topic that interests you, I would recommend you buy the book, because you'll probably be very happy you did. And I'm not pushing Andy's books for him. All I'm saying is the 2 books I bought, I'm really glad I bought them and read them. Thank you.
Next.
Encore, more.
Mike Lee.
Thanks, Andy, it was very good. I don't quite agree with the 8 stuff and the 9/11 stuff, but I like most of your stuff. We could have this list here. Anyway, it seems to me, just a couple observations, that right-wing radio kind of runs the country. I think they won the political argument. I think they cover most of America, whereas PBS and such don't cover much of America, and left-wing radio. The thing with climate change, and I did some school stuff, some graduate work in that area, you know, I think everybody realized, well, I don't know if they realize it or not, it's really not about now. And I know Chicago will be warmer, so everybody's excited about that, especially after this year. But climate change, if it is true, you know, is about years from now, decades from now. So it's really a tough nut to crack. It's a real tough issue. Speaking of the right wing, how they won the argument because they cover right-wing radio so well in this country, I think the Tea Party won too. The political argument the last 8 years, or however many. You know, they basically fought for the, I don't know why poor people would fight for the 1% and not want to have them taxed more. But they won that argument, so you got to hand it to the Tea Party. I think they won. What else? Most of these other topics are pretty interesting. Yeah, I'm against big military. I mean, it's crazy that we spend more on the military in this country than every other country in the world combined. I mean, if there was ever a serious war, I think that the normal countries would bond together and beat up the bad countries. I mean, I would probably even enlist, even though I'm a little older. Fracking, that's a good issue. No, I'm kind of in favor of fracking because it seems like it's natural gas and it's a little bit more sustainable than big bad oil. Oil's ruining, as we saw in previous shows, oil ruins the environment. I mean, there's chemicals everywhere. There's torn up an environment. God's green earth is ruined. And, but fracking's underground, but it is ruining some groundwater. What other issues here? Otherwise, it's about it. Yeah, I'm all in favor of solar and wind and all the other sustainable electricities to run the bullet trains. Okay. Thank you very much.
You were magnificent.
Tea Party.
Yeah.
Help me. Look at that help for 1%.
For the most part, I agree with much of what Andy had to say. I do, as some other people have already said, have reservations about his comments concerning 9/11 and concerning the AIDS epidemic. And I've stated those criticisms on previous times when he's spoken. But I'm going to devote my comments tonight to something else. We heard some criticisms earlier about redistricting. And we heard it implied that the Democrats, in the current redistricting that they have done here in Illinois, have committed some kind of crime. And I think that's a lot of horseshit, plain and simple. In previous years, it was the Republicans who controlled redistricting, generally because either they controlled one house of the legislature or both, or they had the governor in there and some kind of compromise had to be worked out. Or sometimes they controlled all three. And as a result, the Republicans did what the Democrats have done now. they controlled a map, they created a map that was basically beneficial to the Republicans and not at all to the Democrats. Now, I didn't squawk, because I knew that's how the game is played. Well, now, all of a sudden, for the first time in my 60 years, the Democrats have control the governorship, and they control both houses of the legislature. And so, quite properly, they came up with a map that was beneficial to the Democrats and not at all to the Republicans. The mirror image of the situation we had been faced before. So suddenly now, all these Republicans are screaming about how it's unfair. Well, that's as I said before, that's bullshit. It's no more unfair than what the Republicans had done to the Democrats during the years when they controlled the redistricting process. Again, that's how the game is played. And just as we had no right to squawk back during those years, neither do they.
Gene, Audrey, Anderson.
Obviously, I don't have no experience in medicine and knowledge and so forth and so on. However, I was around in '84, and I was around when they said we had an AIDS epidemic. Now, if I had to go with the official version, and I had to go with what Agnes said, I'm going to be on Agnes' side. Now, if it was made up, I would lean to that. Why? Because I got experience in rights to reason to believe that. Because I'm familiar with my government. They have misled before, they will misled in the future, and so on and so on. So, he makes a good point. He switched from cancer. You remember when everybody was scared of cancer? Oh, cancer this and cancer that. Well, guess why they switched to the other reason they switched to AIDS? Because AIDS was, by their record, not by scientific record, but AIDS was can be transmitted from one other person, especially if you have sex. Well, I know for a goddamn fact, all their lives they've been using sex for this and sex for that, sex for this. They done wrote books and Bibles. You ain't even supposed to have no sex unless you're going to have some kids. Now, I done heard all of that. So I can take the position I'm taking. Now, as far as population explosion and so forth and so on, and human beings is going to be so many of us we can't get around and blah, blah, blah. Well, we had people scaring us 50 years ago. And probably a bit long before that about the population explosion. I tell you people, you should be scared of governments like I am. Because history will tell you more people done died from government than anywhere, than any, whatever nature did with, other than your death that you're going to get, all of us going to get. Ain't nowhere in the world nature done killed as many people with tornadoes and hurricanes as governments have. And you can look that up and you can think about it. And I'm telling you, when you talk about, oh, this ain't gonna be enough, that ain't gonna be enough. If somebody ain't got no water, some other asshole got this water. If ain't nobody got this, no air, so don't worry about it. Because air is something that nature gave you and given you. Food and shit is what nature gives you. And if you ain't got no food, some other person got your food. Nature don't need no help from man to protect nature. Man should be trying to protect his own ass.
Mr. President.
I want you guys to take a good, long, hard look at the amount of liquid in this glass. Because this is what would represent your entire lifetime supply of energy requirements using one of the new Gen 4 nuclear power reactors, the safer kind that I've been advocating for years, the thorium molten salt reactor. If we are to disclaim nuclear, which I agree with Andy Anderson on with the current breed of light water reactors that we're doing, yes, Nuclear is dangerous. Even my friends at the Thorium Energy Alliance claim that nuclear power in its present form is dangerous. Basically, though, you have to understand something. We've only had 3 major incidents, but when something goes wrong with these older type light water reactors, it goes wrong in a big way. We still have 3 Mile Island. We still have Chernobyl, and we do have Fukushima. However, only thing I'm going to say is this. E equals mc squared. The energy times the amount of matter times the speed of light squared. There is a heck of a lot more energy in a glass that if this was to represent uranium or thorium, or I could power my entire lifetime supply of power. No fossil fuel, no solar panel, or no wind turbine could come to match this. And for us to blatantly discount this field of science, which basically could get us off oil, which basically could get us off gas and electric, and power our future, I think it's well worth exploring. I'm not going to get in here right now and give you a long technical explanation of what these Gen 4 thorium molten salt reactors are, but you certainly can Google the Thorium Energy Alliance. Particularly take a good look at a gentleman by the name of Gordon McDowell, and you will see where I'm coming from. I'm not going to discount solar and wind. It's got a place. It does have a lot of uses, but as far as replacing oil or fossil fuels, it's probably not going to happen. The oil industry, the amount of fuel that we use is just too great for us to replace it with solar and wind turbines. Now, I have started looking at some of Andy's research that he's talked about, and it's incredible the amount of breakthroughs that are coming in these fields. But for me to simply sit here and say that that will replace our world power grid, our amount of energy we're using, and conservation, I really don't think so. The numbers tell me a different story. So all I'm going to simply say is this: Andy, excellent job tonight in giving a good presentation. You need to be complimented very well. Let's give him a hand. Yay. One more time. And yes, I'm a nuclear supporter.
I'm an athletic supporter.
Is that it for rebuttal?
You're a climate.
If nobody else is rebutting, I would like Andy to, where are you, Andy?
Right there.
Aha. As the last word.
Good luck.
I think we do owe Andy another round of applause for a very good, excellent presentation tonight.
Even if it was just
Tim.
following all these books here.
Well, thank you all for coming again.
The sound equipment.
I guess on some of the, in many times in the past during rebuttals, people have said, well, I think Andy's opinion is wrong, or that's Andy's book. There's several Nobel Prize winners scattered through here with dozens of hundreds of other people that have Nobel Prize credentials. They don't produce Andy's books. I don't have anything to do with them. Maybe I didn't make it clear at the start. I'm a translator. I simply take the work of other Nobel Prize winners from all over the world and translate their work into a readable format so you don't have to read a whole book. If you have a difference of opinion with, or you can't believe it quite, look into the guy with the Nobel Prize. Study his work. He's been at it for 30 or 40 years. A lot of these other people, Pulitzer Prize winners. And the reason I brought 100 pounds of books in here tonight is I wanted to show you that what's here on these subjects, on especially on the Golden Triangle, what's here is just the tip of the iceberg. The database, for example, several people have said they agree with me on a lot of things except They're not sure about the information on 9/11 or AIDS. Well, if you notice, those are two of the three cornerstones of the triangle. We get 10,000 minutes of propaganda for each single minute of truth that creeps through in the mainstream media. Briefly, all you need to understand what happened on 9/11, you just need to understand what's in the picture on the front cover of this book. It's called Where Did the Towers Go? Written by Professor Judy Wood, retired professor of material science out of Clemson University. Where did the towers go? Because she says clearly the towers, the two twin towers, went sideways in the wind as a cloud of dust. They did not collapse and fall to the ground. The firefighters in their oral testimony on the night of 9/11, they all reported the same thing. They said, one fire chief said, when a building collapses and there's no rubble pile on the ground where the building should be, all the junk, he said, when there's no rubble pile compared to the building, he said, you know something bad happened in the air. You start with that one simple fact, that two towers went sideways in the wind as a cloud of fine, microscopic dust. They were dustified in seconds before anything hit the ground. They were prepped weeks, months, or maybe years in advance. The last thing I would say on that, on September 13th, 2 days after the 9/11 anniversary, I'm going to give a presentation here, and the overwhelming majority of the books will be on 9/11 that night. We'll give a total presentation, an update of the forensic evidence of what is now known. And not like the forensic evidence on the effects of smoking 4 packs a day.
What?
You could debate that 50 years ago. Today you can't debate that. The answer is no. You could debate 50 years ago the health hazards of breathing asbestos dust in a factory. Today it's non-debatable. Well, the database on what happened on 9/11 is as big or bigger than the database of what happened in the history of asbestos or tobacco coming up. Several people have commented that they think the alternate energy movement is not big enough to make a difference. The only point you need to understand about promoting a new generation of nuclear power is that the human race will be past the tipping point and heading toward extinction before the first new generation of plants can get online and give us any energy at all. There's a time frame involved. Those plants, if we started building them 50 years ago and there were 3,000 of them available now to take the place of all the coal and oil we're burning all over the world, yeah, that type of plant, if they were clean, safe, and too cheap to meter, might be able to make a difference. But we know that's not the case. This is a new type of reactor. There's no commercial reactor of that size operating anywhere in the world. They have yet to build one and iron the bugs out over a decade of time. You don't just build one of those things and put it online. You have to iron the bugs out. There's all kinds of metallurgical problems, corrosion problems, and they're talking about liquid metal sodium, highly, highly corrosive. They were called liquid metal breeders, more or less, for that same technology back 50 years ago. The technology was scrapped because they recognized that there were much more problems with it than with the light water reactors we have now. So in any case, we're looking at the time frame, and this book, 10 Billion, and many other science books talking about how fast the global climate change problems and driven by fossil fuel, how fast that's happening. We have to deal with it in the time frame. Promoting the next generation of nuclear power plants is the same thing as promoting, giving somebody a new type of, like a blood clotting agent that would stop the blood. If they had a cut in an artery or something, they were brought into an emergency room and they're bleeding out, and the doctor says, well, in 6 months we'll have a clotting agent that will solve your problem. It doesn't address the critical problem in the time frame. Another scientist said, promoting this generation of nuclear power plants even if they were all that they were claimed to be, that's the same thing as promoting research on a fireproof paint while your house is burning down. You have to address the time frame. And if you can't get around that, then the question is moot. On the subject, there's a lot of confusion, and naturally there's a lot of confusion, again, because of the ratio of 10,000 to 1. We get, it's probably 50,000 to 1 in this country. You get 50,000 minutes of all media, radio, television, everything else promoting HIV/AIDS, HIV/AIDS, HIV/AIDS. For every single minute of truth that comes through from other countries. The database on what I told you on AIDS tonight, and the two main things. HIV is not the cause. The HIV tests are bogus. They don't test for the virus, and in this country, they estimate now that 95% of the people we were told were dying of AIDS didn't have AIDS. They had an illness. They were dying, but they were misdiagnosed as AIDS. There's this DVD, award-winning DVD called House of Numbers. You can buy this at Barnes & Noble, order it online. House of Numbers, this House of Numbers is by a documentary made by Brent Lang. And he went around the world interviewing AIDS experts. And this DVD, and the later one called, you can download it and buy it off the internet directly, it's called Positively False, The Birth of a Heresy. Positively False comes out of England. It's put together by Joan Shenton. It's like Channel 60 Minutes, but Channel 4 in England. And they've been following the AIDS hoax for 25 years. But those two, this one and the other one, Positively False, The Birth of a Heresy, interview AIDS scientists from all over the world. Is anybody here familiar with the name Dr. Luc Montagnier from France? Does anybody know, is that name familiar? Anybody familiar with Dr. Robert Gallo? Gallo he shared the discovery of HIV, more or less. They shared the credit because Gallo's lab actually stole the virus from the French. The French sent them their samples of what they thought was the HIV virus, and Gallo just basically appropriated and announced it at a press conference, and then Ronald Reagan made a deal with the French premier, and the two of them shook hands and they said, well, we'll share credit. Well, Dr. Luc Montagnier from France was the one that in 1983, he was like the co-discoverer. They thought this retrovirus HIV was the cause of what was making people sick. By 1990, Dr. Montagnier was saying in AIDS conferences, HIV is not the cause of AIDS. It's not what's making people sick. And he said a healthy immune system will shrug it right off. It's in this documentary and others. Many, many, many AIDS doctors that have studied this have come to the conclusion that one doctor said it took him like 7 years. He says, I'm a medical doctor and it took me 7 years to see through the fraud that they were promoting in the United States. And so you're welcome to peruse the titles. There's all kinds of books you can download. The Virus Myth site, the Rethinking AIDS site, the Alberta Reappraising AIDS Society in Canada publishes articles weekly on the rest of the world correcting what their population is being told on what AIDS is, what causes it, and all the things that have been, other countries, the Blue Flyer talks about that, and from 1997, that was one of the top 10 blacked out subjects, that doctors all over the world were curing people of all the illnesses being misdiagnosed as AIDS. You get outside the United States, and other doctors were basically telling people, well, this is what causes your illness, it's not HIV, this is what you do to cure it. But it's in the United States, we're encouraged to think that doctors know what they're talking about, that no doctors would be unethical enough to misdiagnose their patients on purpose just for money. And we certainly don't want to think that a doctor would accept $10,000 a year per patient for writing prescriptions for rat poison and then cheerlead that patient right into his grave. That's what the book Wrongful Death talks about, written in 2007. The book is called Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial, and it tells the whole entire story with testimony taken out of court cases that had been settling out of court to keep the American public from finding out the huge crime and malpractice that these doctors were involved in. But this is not the first time doctors have been involved in something like this. So you can read Duisberg's book, and also The AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire by Nancy Turner Banks. That tells the whole story of the corporate, medical, military, industrial malfeasance with big money in motion. When billions of dollars are at stake, it's easy to find people that will go along with the program. I think it was Sinclair Lewis that said in 1935 or so that it's hard to get a man to understand a fact if his salary depends on him not understanding it. Confucius said it's impossible to wake up a man who is pretending to be asleep. Dr. Martin Luther King said, nothing in the world is more dangerous in all the world than sincere stupidity and conscientious ignorance. And then finally Albert Einstein said, the human race is in a race between education and extinction. I'm not sure who's winning. And that's where we are. And in each year, the books on climate scientists get more and more specific. So in closing, I would say, we can do something about the U.S. military going after our kids by doing what many of the groups, there's Veterans Against 9/11, Veterans Against the Wars, there's all kinds of veterans groups that are trying to educate the public on what Smedley Brothers said. We're out there as muscle for the mob. We're not fighting for freedom anywhere in the world. This book, this little book is easily obtainable. It's called War is a Racket. You can get copies of it, give it to your friends, neighbors, anybody that's got a kid, son or daughter that's going through middle school. They recommend that this book be read as 8th graders before they get to high school, because the recruiters are going after them in high school saying, you can get a really good job, way better than minimum wage and everything else, if you enlist in one of the glorious openings in the U.S. military. We've got a massive poverty draft going in this country because there are no living wage jobs for kids coming out of high school. 80% of them come out of high school. They have no hope of getting a job in this country because 60,000 factories have moved overseas in the last 12 years. Those jobs weren't lost. The factory shut down here. All the hardware, the tool and die production line was moved on pallets, boxcars, and boats. They shipped the whole factory, the production, to some place in China or Taiwan, mostly China, and then 10,000 jobs were lost here, 10,000 jobs, people were employed running the same American machinery overseas. That's what's happened to jobs in just the last 14 years. So I think we'll wrap it up with that. And anybody has any questions, come see me afterwards. We'll do the best we can as we're boxing up the books. And come September 13th, if you want to hear a whole evening on the forensic evidence on 9/11 and what we can do to move the country forward. We puncture that one myth, and a whole bunch of bad things that are happening in America, can be brought to an end. We can change the face of America just by puncturing the myth of 9/11. Thank you all.